Today's webinar is Demographic Analysis for Environmental Evaluations. Welcome and thank you for joining us. The webinar host is the Central Environmental Management Office of the Florida Department of Transportation. The webinar is part of the department's Community Resources Program. My name is Tammy Vrana of Vrana Consulting, and I'll be presenting the webinar today with the assistance of Chris Sands of URS Corporation. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Tammy. I'm ready to go.
Okay, let's go. So I want to bring your attention to the department's webpage, which includes a list of commonly used terms for demographic analysis and other resources for demographic analysis. The webpage address is listed on the slide. It will also be listed on the very last slide today. Also, a video of this webinar will be uploaded to the SCE site for viewing later, and it will be posted sometime early next week. All attendees will be in listen-only mode, but we hope to hear from you during the webinar. Your questions or comments can be typed in the chat box in the control panel at any time during the webinar. We'll respond to the questions at the end of the presentation, but if there's something that Chris can help you with during the webinar, he'll do that. Also, if you want to move the control panel out of your way, it can be minimized by clicking on the red arrow at the top. We'll be setting up poll questions throughout the webinar, and Chris is going to help us with those. So Chris, let's go ahead and start the first poll question now just to get everybody warmed up.
All right. Let's launch our first poll then. And the question is, have you ever performed a demographic analysis? So everyone can respond to the polls by voting. And we'll just give it a little while and see if we get some response. Getting a lot of participation.
Good. Looking forward to seeing the results.
All right, about 90% of the folks have voted.
Okay.
All right, let's give it a few more seconds. We'll close it out. All right, we're going to go ahead and close the polls then. Last chance to vote. All right, let's close it. And let's see what the results were. So 61% said yes.
Okay, so we have some experienced folks in the audience, and we have some novices as well, so that should make for a good mix of questions at the end. So we're looking forward to hearing what your thoughts or your questions are. Okay, so let's go over what we're going to cover in the next hour. The learning objectives of the webinar include the types of data available for conducting a demographic analysis and where to find that data. We'll talk about using the data to reveal population characteristics and trends in the study area, including specific populations that could be affected by a transportation action. Then we'll go over a methodology for assessing the data using statistical references and then reporting your findings. The webinar has 5 parts. The first examines demographic analysis and its role in environmental evaluations. Part 2 is an overview of the demographic data sources and data sets. Part 3 covers the basics for working with U.S. Census Bureau data. Described in Part 4 are the steps in performing a demographic analysis, and we'll conclude where the results of the demographic analysis are documented in an environmental document. So let's cover what demographic analysis is and how it's used to support in environmental evaluations. Demographic analysis is a technique used to understand the static aspects of a population at a point in time. It's also used to identify the dynamic processes of birth, death, and migration that can lead to changes in a population over a period of time. In Florida, we're well aware of the influence of migration on the population size and demographic composition of communities. So demographic analysis is used for multiple purposes during an environmental evaluation. First, it helps us find and know who is present in the community, including residents and others who routinely occupy the study area for work, school, or other purposes. We also learn about special concern populations that are addressed in Title VI of the Civil Rights Act and other non-discrimination laws. Also, when we look at past and present data, we can detect population trends that could be a factor in project decision-making. Understanding the character of the community provides context for assessing potential sociocultural effects, including those involving minority and low-income populations. By knowing where these population groups are present in the study area, the project team can be mindful of the potential for disproportionately high and adverse effects on the health or environment of these persons. Demographic analysis also helps us plan more effectively for special community needs that could be accommodated by the transportation project. The public involvement program for the project also benefits from demographic analysis. If we know that limited English proficiency is a characteristic of the community, then project communications and ways of receiving public input can be tailored to make participation by LEP groups possible. So what are the characteristics of the study area community that we need to know to support an environmental evaluation? We look to the data to inform us about the community in terms of race and ethnicity, age distribution, disability status, educational attainment, English proficiency, income levels and poverty status, housing types and values, and vehicle availability. Where this information can be found is our next topic. The primary source of data for demographic analysis is the U.S. Census Bureau. The Census Bureau provides two key demographic data products, the census and the American Community Survey. The census is a historic snapshot of our nation that's conducted every 10 years. It provides counts on basic population characteristics at all geographic levels of the census across the United States and Puerto Rico. As of 2010, the census data includes only 100% counts, unlike earlier censuses that included some sample-based population estimates for certain topics. The census data is available at the smallest unit, which is the block. The 2010 census has three data sets that we use for our project-level demographic analysis. The first is the demographic profile, which contains summary, population, and housing information in a single table. Summary File 1 presents population and housing data compiled from the census questionnaire within 330 detailed tables. Summary File 2 contains cross-tabulations of the Summary File 1 data by race, Hispanic or Latino ethnicity, and by American Indian and Alaska Native tribes. Summary File 2 data is reported in 71 tables. The census reports data about individuals including the total population, race, Hispanic or Latino ethnicity, age, and sex. It also reports groupings of individuals in households, families, and group quarters, and housing units, housing occupancy, and whether those housing units are owner or renter occupied. The other Census Bureau data product that's used heavily for demographic analysis is the American Community Survey. The ACS provides demographic data throughout the decade in the time between the decennial censuses. Testing of the ACS began in 1996 and was fully implemented in 2005. The ACS data is based on random sampling from approximately 250,000 addresses each month across the U.S. and Puerto Rico. It provides information about how people live. The ACS includes sample data on more than 40 topics. For those of you that have been using census data for a long time, the ACS data is similar to the discontinued Census Summary File 3. The ACS replaced SF3 in 2010. The lowest level of geography published in the ACS is the block group. So the data subjects or topics that are available in the ACS include those on the general demographic characteristics like those reported in the census, and also include social characteristics such as education, language spoken at home, and place of birth. There are economic characteristics including income and poverty level, vehicles available, workforce types, housing characteristics such as the year built and the number of units and structures, and financial characteristics telling us about owner versus renter-occupied units and housing values. The ACS is a continuous survey providing data reported in 1, 3, and 5-year periods. The ACS data is derived from monthly sampling of geographic areas meeting certain population thresholds. Because the ACS is a sample survey as opposed to 100% counts, a margin of error is reported for each estimate. When the Census Bureau believes that the sample for a particular location is sufficient to make the estimates reasonably reliable, the data is released. The ACS one-year estimate is produced annually for areas with a population of 65,000 or greater. While this data is the most current, it's based on only 1 year of data, giving it a larger margin of error than the 3- and 5-year data sets. Areas with a population of 20,000 or more are covered in the ACS 3-year estimates. The data represents the middle ground relative to data accuracy and currency. The ACS 5-year estimates are available for all areas, at most of the census geographies including census block groups. Although it is the least current of the data sets, it's based on 5 years of data, which translates to lower margins of error and greater reliability. The 5-year estimates at the census block group level were first released in 2010 from ACS data collected from the years 2005 through 2009. Since block group level data is not available for the 1- and 3-year data sets, the 5-year estimates are our go-to data set for a project-level demographic analysis. The data is released in late summer or fall of the year following the survey. This data table shows how the Census Bureau releases ACS data for the 1-, 3-, and 5-year estimates. The data is released in late summer or fall of the year following the survey. To give you a sense of scale, these maps show the areas surveyed in Florida for the 1- and 3-year ACS. The areas shown in white were not surveyed. A map for the ACS 5-year estimates isn't shown because that data set includes survey information for all areas. While census and ACS data is a tremendous resource for demographic analysis, we look for data from other sources to fill in the gaps. The census and ACS data can be unreliable for accurately portraying the character of a community. Keep in mind, the census is based on self-reported data, so it's prone to undercounting if the person completing the census questionnaire is reluctant to divulge personal or household information. Also, for smaller geographic areas, census data is not always certain, especially for sample-based ACS data. Plus, the census and ACS data doesn't tell us about the character of people coming into the community each day for work or other activities. Localized demographic information is regularly compiled by transportation agencies, school boards, social service agencies, housing agencies, and health departments. You can also find out anecdotal information about the community from sources within the community. For example, these federal agencies are sources of demographic data. The U.S. Department of Agriculture reports the location of retailers that accept SNAP, which was previously known as food stamps. Concentrations of these retailers could indicate a large number of low-income households in the community. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development maintains locational data on low-income housing, such as Section 8 housing. The National Center for Education Statistics compiles data collected from local school districts on race, ethnicity, and income. And the Social Security Administration collects and reports data on the distribution of disability benefits. There are national advocacy organizations such as National Council of La Raza, 500 Nations, and National Urban League that may have a local or regional office that has information about the minority populations in your study area. County government is a source of land use data that can show us where the places where people live and work in a community. To learn more about the people in your study area neighborhoods, you should visit the study area to observe. Walk around if you can. Strike up conversations with people you meet. Ask about the population groups that are in the area and if there are community organizations or leaders associated with those groups. Field review is also a very good way for verifying the data you've collected from other sources. Local agencies, such as those providing social services, may collect data on special needs populations in your study area, including transient and low-income populations. My Florida Web 211 provides contacts for a variety of social services offered in the state of Florida and through its partners. Also, local business organizations, such as chambers of commerce, can tell you about the demographics of business owners, employees, and patrons in the study area. Keep in mind that demographic analysis is an iterative process. A variety of data sources will help improve the reliability of your results. This is especially true in Florida, where change in communities is common and often swift. As you perform outreach for the project, tell people what you've learned so far about their community and ask, are we missing anyone? So let's stop right there, have a little poll question. Chris, why don't you cue up the next poll?
All right, here we go with the next poll. Which data set from the American Communities Survey, ACS, is the best for demographic analysis for an environmental evaluation? All right, we got half of our folks have already voted. All right, coming up towards 90%.
Coming up.
Okay, we're going to close the polling here shortly. Last chance to vote. Can we hit 90%? Almost? All right, let's go. We're going to close the poll now.
Glad everybody's participating. That's great.
Yeah, fantastic. Let's see our results.
Oh, okay, well the answer is the ACS 5-year, and that's because the census the information is available all the way down to the block level, and it provides a lot of information about the way people live, so that's important to our demographic analysis. Great, thank you. Thanks for participating. So moving on to the next part, I'll provide an orientation to the geographic areas in which the census and the ACS data are reported. This slide shows the hierarchy of census geographies, starting with the smallest geographic unit at the bottom, the census block, and moving up to the largest, which is the nation. We'll focus on the center column in the figure, the backbone of the census data, from counties down to blocks. The Census Bureau divides counties into county subdivisions, subdivisions into places like cities, cities into census tracts, tracts into block groups, and block groups into blocks, which is the smallest census division. These divisions are nested, which essentially means that the sum population of all the blocks in a block group will equal the population reported for the block group. The geographic unit of least size, where most of the data sets for demographic analysis are available, is the block group. Also important to demographic analysis is the census block, especially when greater detail on the location of minority or low-income populations is needed to assess project impacts. County-level data serves as a statistical reference for comparison of study area demographic characteristics. Census tract data is not the ideal unit for project-level demographic analysis, as this data is usually not fine-grained enough to assess the character of the project study area. Census geographies vary in area depending on the size of the population. This graphic shows the census tracts and block groups that are smaller in the more densely populated area in the urban center, while the divisions are considerably larger at the rural periphery. The optimal population for a census tract is 4,000 people, but population can range between 1,000 and 8,000 people. Census tracts are drawn around relatively homogeneous populations and are used in Senate redistrictings. Census block groups average around 1,500 people but can range between 300 and 3,000. Again, they are the smallest area for which sample data is available. Census blocks usually contain about 100 people, which are generally bounded by visible features and legal boundaries. Because of privacy concerns, the census does not publish income data at the block level. So now that we know about the census data that's available and the census units that they're reported under, let's go over some ways to obtain the data you'll need. The census and ACS data and the geographies can be downloaded from the U.S. Census Bureau website. On the website, you'll find the data ferret, a data librarian that can search and retrieve data. In addition to census and ACS datasets, the tool provides access to other data including American Housing Survey, National Center for Health Statistics data, and Centers for Disease Control data. Clicking on the Data Ferret link will bring you to this page where there is a simple login process. After logging in, a browser appears with options for learning about the tool and the Census Bureau's data web. Click on Get Data Now at the bottom to begin Step 1, select Datasets and Variables, and conclude with Step 2 where you can view your data in a basket, download the data, or make a table. The link shown is to a helpful video that can take you step by step through the Data Ferret data selection and download process. This information is also reported on the SCE process website the district maintains. American Fact Finder is another U.S. Census Bureau tool that allows data queries of a full range of census products and data sets. Fact Finder has a guided search option that's shown on the slide and also an advanced search. However, American Fact Finder is of limited use for project-level demographic analysis because ACS data is not available at the block group level. Fact Finder does show block group data for census data and the ACS data for larger census geographies such as census tracts and counties. The Florida Geographic Data Library offers all data layers stored in the library for download, including Census Bureau datasets. Click the link to enter the FGDL Metadata Explorer, and you'll be able to search the data and download from the search results. There's also an option to download directly from the FGDL FTP site, a lot of acronyms there. So if you already know what information you're looking for, you can go directly to that. If your project was previously screened as an ETDM project, Efficient Transportation Decision-Making Project, the Environmental Screening Tool will contain demographic data for the study area used in the ETDM screening. The EST data is maintained and updated by the Florida Geographic Data Library as new data becomes available. The purple box on the slide shows the types of analyses that are performed for the report. The analysis results look like this. The data is reported for each block group represented in the area analyzed and also for the blocks and block groups. The table on top shows different demographic characteristics in terms of persons per acre or density. The lower table shows the percentage of racial and ethnic groups to the total block group population. The Environmental Screening Tool is also capable of producing community characteristics inventories for areas with designated community boundaries, such as those for locally defined communities and census-designated places. The CCI report is in the final stages of enhancements, so here's a peek at how the report is shaping up. It will include demographic data at the block group level and county levels for the 1990, 2000, 2010 censuses and the most currently available 5-year ACS data. The department's EST team is also looking into expanding the reach of the CCI tool to include user-defined areas of interest. Then the CCI tool would be available for a range of transportation project types. If your project area is within Broward, Miami-Dade, or Palm Beach counties, the Transportation Outreach Planner tool can generate customized demographic reports, much like the Community Characteristics Inventory tool. Demographic information is also available for select communities. The customized demographic report shown on this slide includes data by area of interest, county, and state. So if you've ever been out in the field and wondered what is the median age of this community, well, turns out there's an app for that. The Zeitgeist app provides demographic data from the Census Bureau on information such as age distribution, median home values, the average rent per month, and how people commute. However, the data is reported by census tract, not at the smaller census units that we rely on for demographic analysis. So at this point, we're just going to take a short break, just a minute, move around, maybe have a stretch, get the blood flowing. You'll probably feel like yawning. Chris is going to give us some music. We all know that yawning boosts oxygen in the brain. Did you know it heightens consciousness and relaxation as well? It makes a perfect accompaniment to demographic analysis. Okay, I think that's maybe the end of our 60 seconds.
Yep.
So let's get back to it with a poll question. Chris, would you do us the pleasure of showing us our next poll?
Sure. Let me find my polls here. Data at the block group level is the most useful census information for analyzing demographics in the study area. True or false? We got half our answers in. There seems to be some disagreement. About 80% of our folks have weighed in, and there's a clear leader here. Give it a few more seconds. I think there are some undecideds who haven't weighed in yet. All right, we're going to close out the poll and let's take a look at the results.
Okay, so it's a little bit tricky, and it sounded a lot like the last one that we provided, but really it depends on your study area. So if you have an area, perhaps in a rural location, where the census block groups are particularly large, you may want to be able to look down at the census block level to get a better idea of where the populations are located within that block group. But overall, the most data that's available for demographic analysis is going to be at your block group level. So
true.
So it's true, but it depends, as in normal things with what we do.
True with an asterisk.
Yeah, there you go. Thanks, Chris. So moving on to part 4, we're going to walk through the steps to preparing a demographic analysis. We've broken it down into 5 steps, which include selecting the census geographies that conform to your study area, obtaining census data and other data for the demographic analysis, organizing and analyzing the data, verifying the comprehensiveness, concurrency, and accuracy of the data, and summarizing your findings for your use and also for the use of others that are involved in the project. So first I'll talk about selecting census geographies and reconciling them to the shape of your study area. We'll start off by reviewing a map of the study area and a map of nearby census block groups. Look at the block groups that are within the study area and adjacent to it. Notice how the shapes relate. If the shape of the nearby block groups generally align with the study area, you could consider adjusting the study area boundary to match the shape of the nearby block groups. By doing this, it simplifies the analysis of the census data not only for the current analysis, but also for any future project phases that need an updated demographic analysis. Also, you don't run the risk of diminishing the accuracy of the census data that can happen when the block groups are clipped to match the study area and then the data is interpolated to fit the new shape of the block group. You'll need to determine if this approach is the best one for the project by taking into consideration the characteristics of the study area. This Census Geographies map view provides a Google Maps style way for you to look at the census geography within your study area. It's a good tool for the initial look. So there are 3 additional methods for reconciling the study area with the census geographies that you can also consider. The first is called intersection, which includes the data from the census geographies that intersect or touch the study area boundary. The slide shows the study area outlined in bright yellow-green. The purple area shows the census blocks that touch the study area. You can see from the purple area that extends beyond that study area boundary, where the arrow is pointing, that this method has the potential to overestimate. Population data from outside the study area would be counted in the analysis. So this method could be useful in densely populated areas where block groups or blocks are relatively small and generally conform to the study area. Intersection might also work well when you are taking an initial look at demographics within a certain buffer distance from a project, say 500 feet from the project center line. This approach would be useful for a type 2 categorical exclusion. If no affected populations are found, then you wouldn't have to investigate further. The second method is interpolation, which involves clipping the census geographies, in our case the block groups, to the study area boundary. The data values of the affected block groups are then estimated by assuming an equal distribution across the block group area. The data is recalculated based on the percentage of the block groups within the study area. The arrow shows the study area boundary where the block group was clipped. So this method is useful when analyzing communities with designated boundaries that are not similar to the boundaries of the block group. This is often the case in rural areas where block groups can be relatively large. Because the interpolation method assumes the population is equally dispersed, it is prone to undercounting or overcounting when the actual population is unequally dispersed. This could occur in areas with a large water body or attractive public land, such as a forest. When using this method, be sure to review the existing land use map to know where residential areas are and consult other sources to verify the accuracy of the estimates. Containment is our third method. Containment includes only the geographic census geographies that are entirely contained within the study area. So notice the purple census blocks within the study area. From the non-purple areas, you can see there's a fairly large portion that would be excluded from the analysis. Therefore, containment method is prone to underestimating data. Containment is most appropriate when you are taking an initial look at the project area. This would involve using a very large buffer as a preliminary study area, one that extends well beyond the census block groups or blocks where potentially affected populations are. When you know the community, you would refine the study area from there. So our next step is to obtain all the data needed for the demographic analysis. You'll need to obtain census data for the study area as well as for the county jurisdictions applicable to the study area. The county data provides a basis for comparison to help you recognize unique demographic characteristics about the study area. You might notice that there are several block groups with a higher median age than reported for the countywide population. By looking at the age distribution among the block groups, you might find higher percentages of persons 65 years of age or older than is the county as a whole. This information could be significant to evaluating potential project effects, designing community-desired project features, and organizing public involvement. The data you'll need comes from the latest 5-year American Community Survey, that's the current data, and the data from the last 10-year census and at least the one preceding. You download this data into GIS, which stands for Geographic Information System. The GIS is a data management software that ties the data to the geography, allowing the information to be organized in various ways and be viewed in maps. Other data will be needed to know about the demographics of people who come into the study area on a regular basis, such as employees and shoppers. The census data won't tell you that. Also recall that the census data should be supplemented with information from other sources to discover any data flaws or gaps. In the next few slides, I'll highlight the data used in demographic analysis that tells us about individuals in a population. It's important to know about race and ethnicity of the study area community. We do this not only to understand the overall demographic character of the study area, but also to identify minority groups protected under Title VI and other anti-discrimination laws. When minority populations are present in the study area, further evaluation will be necessary to determine the potential for project effects and whether those effects might result in disproportionately high and adverse impacts. The census categories for race are shown on the left portion of the slide. On the right is the census ethnicity category of Hispanic or Latino of any race. While working with the census data, you'll notice that when the counts for race categories are totaled, it will be equal to the total population for the geographic area being examined, such as the block group. Persons of Hispanic or Latino ethnicity can be of any race, so don't combine the counts for Hispanic Latino ethnicity with counts for race, or you're going to get a number that's higher than 100%. Race and ethnicity information is available from all censuses at the block level and above, and from the ACS from the block group level and above. Check other data sources for further information on race and ethnicity. I touched on a few sources earlier, and there are a few other suggestions on the SCE website. From the age distribution in the study area, we can tell a lot about the population's daily routines and possible needs. For example, younger and older age cohorts may have different mobility needs. The young and the old may rely more on walking, biking, or bus to get around, and that could also influence your project. Data about age distribution and the median age is available in the censuses down to the block level and in the ACS down to the block group level. Other sources that you might tap for age-related data include local school districts and social service agencies. Considerations for people with disabilities are like those for the younger and older age groups. Persons with disabilities may have special transportation needs. Additionally, persons with certain disabilities could require special accommodations for project communications. Disability data is available from the 2000 census at the block group level. This is sample-based data, is not provided in the 2010 census, and the ACS is not reporting it yet at the block group level. So ACS disability data is expected in 2014. This means you're going to need to look elsewhere to get information on the disability population. So check with the transit service provider operating in the study area, as those agencies collect data on disabled populations. Also, the Social Security Administration maintains spatial data on disability benefits that might be useful. The level of education in a community is another good indicator. From the data, we get an idea about the number of people in the study area who could be illiterate and wouldn't be able to read information distributed about the project. The 2000 and earlier censuses and the ACS include data on educational attainment for persons 25 years of age and older. The category that we would pay particular attention to as an indicator for literacy are the less than 9th grade and the 9th to 12th grade no diploma. So in this segment, I'll talk about the data that's associated with households. Data pertaining to income and poverty tells us about the overall socioeconomic character of the study area, including the presence of low-income populations. A low-income population is defined as any readily identifiable group of low-income persons who live in geographic proximity. Low-income populations can also include geographically dispersed or transient persons such as migrant workers or persons who are homeless. So pay particular attention to block groups with median household incomes that are less than the county-wide median. The census and the ACS report the number of households with incomes below the poverty level and also households having received public assistance income. This information is available at the block group level. HUD data is also useful for identifying low-income populations, including data on low-rent apartment locations and public housing agency contacts. The USDA data on SNAP retailer locations is also a good resource. Language spoken at home data from the U.S. Census Bureau tells us about households that might be excluded from project communications without efforts to remove language barriers. Individuals who do not speak English as their primary language and who have a limited ability to read, speak, write, or understand English may be considered limited English proficient, or LEP for short. Other sources within the community, such as school districts and social service agencies, can help you identify the types of languages spoken in a community. There's also the Census Language Mapper tool, which is not available at smaller census geographies. It reports the information at the county level, but it is a way of indicating the types of language that are spoken throughout the state. Now we'll talk about information related to housing units. Median housing values are an indicator of income status. Of particular interest are areas with median housing values that are below the county-wide median. Concentrations of lower value homes and rental units could indicate a low-income population. The ACS data will be the main source of median housing value. Concentrations of non-single-family units could also be an indicator of low-income neighborhoods. This data can be found in censuses before 2010 and in the American Community Survey. The Department of Housing and Urban Development, the U.S. level, is a source of data for the location of low-income housing. The Mobile Home Park Store website lists the addresses of mobile homes and RV parks. That link is also provided on the SCE page on the department's website. The ACS and 2000 census data includes housing units with zero vehicles. This information tells us about households that probably rely on walking, biking, or bus for mobility. So now that we've downloaded our data, our next step is to organize it in a way that we can analyze it. You'll want to organize the data in a way that you compare it to the county data. So the county data serves as your statistical reference. It provides insights into whether the study area differs demographically from the larger area, including the effects of sociocultural trends. As you compare the study area block groups to the county, look for similarities and differences and changes in the population over time. This slide shows an example table for organizing the census data for the study area and the county. The data subjects are listed in the first column, along with the corresponding census or ACS data sets for the three periods, the current, 2010, and 2000. The Census Bureau identification numbers are shown in italics. The data values are shown by block group in the columns, and to the right the same data is reported for the county. The purple boxes point out data on the white alone population for that particular block group and for the county as a whole. So we can tell from this that the census block had a slightly higher white alone population in 2000 than did the county. Looking at the 2011 data, we can see that the white population has significantly dropped, while the countywide figure decreased at a much lower rate. This could be an indicator of a population trend in the study area that is not being experienced in the larger community, or it could be a very localized occurrence. You would look at all the census blocks in the area to get a better sense of what's happening. In the next step, we check the data to ensure that it accurately reflects the study area community. We do this because we know that the information will be relied on for several important tasks in the environmental evaluation. Data collection and analysis should always include quality checks. This could involve simply looking at the data to see if it seems reasonable given what you've come to know about the community. Or checking could be more involved, such as comparing the data with other sources to see if there's consistency. So you're always going to want to use the best available data for your demographic analysis. So ask, is the data current? Is the data geographically suited to the study area so that the data accurately portrays the study area? And have you examined a wide range of data, cross-checking with different data sources and community outreach? At this point, we've obtained, organized, analyzed, and verified the data for the demographic analysis. So the last step is to summarize and present the findings in a way that can help others understand what is material to their role in the environmental evaluation. We want to present the data that's been compiled in a way that's easy for a reader to find what's important to the project evaluation. You'll want to describe the social characteristics and special populations in the study area, how the general population and population groups are distributed, and any population trends of interest. Pinpoint the demographic conditions you've discovered in the study area that are relevant to the sociocultural effects evaluation, which includes identifying and resolving community effects, and also that information related to the public involvement program. Tell the story by describing the data in context. For example, you could say there are 2,700 Hispanic or Latino residents in the study area, representing 17% of the total study area population. Use charts, maps, and photos in addition to text to convey the information quickly and clearly and make it easy to understand. Use GIS to layer different data to show concentrations of certain population groups or housing types. Generally explain your methodology and always indicate the data sets used, including the data source and the vintage. After the demographic analysis has been completed for a project environmental evaluation, where does it go? Because the character of the community is a basis of project decision-making, what was learned from the demographic analysis is described in the environmental document. All types of environmental documents include information about the study area demographics and the potential for community effects. However, the level of documentation will vary by the class of action and complexity of the project. For instance, for an environmental impact statement, which is abbreviated as EIS on the slide, the community is described in the Affected Environment chapter. Findings about the potential project effects are included in the Environmental Consequences chapter under the Social and Economic section. In some cases, when the potential for community effects are complex or controversial, the results of the demographic analysis are reported in a separate Sociocultural Effects Technical Memorandum. Part 2, Chapter 9 of the PD&E manual provides this outline for the Sociocultural Effects Technical Memo. And last but not least, all of the information that's needed to substantiate the results of demographic analysis go in the project file, which is also sometimes called the administrative record. By doing this, you provide evidence that the community characteristics were investigated and given consideration during the environmental evaluation. The slide shows the types of information included in the project file relative to the sociocultural environment. So before we get on to taking questions, let's bring up our last poll question. Chris?
All right. If the margin of error for an American Community Survey estimate is relatively high, which of these is true? All right, we got about 60% have answered. There seems to be a clear leader here in the results. I think
Make it
people are
sound like
pretty
a
sure
horse
about
race.
this. Yeah. I think people are pretty sure about what's going on here, so we're up over 80%. Give it a few more seconds and we'll close out the poll. All right, last chance. I'm going to close the poll. Let's look at our results.
Okay, very good. Yes, with a high margin of error, you're going to have a potential for underestimating or overestimating because the information may not be a good predictor of what's actually happening within that census unit. Okay, so before we get to questions, I fibbed a little bit there. We're going to, in conclusion, talk about 5 things that I think are important for you to remember in your demographic analysis. So as you perform the demographic analysis, keep in mind how the results will be used in the environmental evaluation. First, they'll be used to describe the community. Second, to support the identification of potential sociocultural effects and solutions. And third, to guide the development of the public involvement program. Make sure that the census data is geographically suited to your study area so you can get an accurate portrayal of the community. Obtain data for the project level demographic analysis from the census block groups, and if needed, the census blocks. Remember, sample-based ACS data, which tells us about the way people live, is not available at the block level. Census tracts cover relatively large areas, typically too large for a project-level demographic analysis. Improve the accuracy of your analysis by visiting your study area and talking to people about their community. Attend neighborhood organization meetings like the one shown in the photo. Ask for help in verifying the data you've collected. People love to look at maps of their community, so show the data that way if you can. Always use the best available data for your demographic analysis. Make sure the data you're using is the most current that is available. Use the latest census and ACS data, and the only place for the 2000 or older data is for comparison to the current data. And last, be sure to check your data and analysis for accuracy. Is everything adding up correctly in your spreadsheet? And does the information shown accurately depict what you've come to learn about the community? So this concludes the presentation part of the webinar. So I'm eager to get to the questions. So if you haven't already, please type your questions in the chat box, and Chris will read them aloud for everyone to hear. So Chris, do we have any questions so far?
Yeah, we've got some great questions. First, the most common question is, where can I get a copy of the presentation we just watched?
Well, the presentation will be uploaded to the department's website, which I'm going to show on the last slide, so you can copy that down. If you want a PDF or a PowerPoint presentation, I suppose we can put that on an FTP site somewhere. It's a little large, so how is that typically handled?
We can generate a PDF. It's actually not that large, and we can put it right there next to the video link so that people can grab either one. They put them both on the Social Cultural Effects webpage.
So how about this? When we get to the last slide, which has my email address, let's communicate then, and you can, whomever is interested in that, will arrange for getting that on in a format that you can pick it up.
Yep. All right, so our first great question, not related to the materials, comes from Bill Evans. He says, why is some census data only available for 2000 or earlier, and how relevant is 13-year-old data anyway?
Well, what happened with the census is that in 2010, certain sample-based data was going to be picked up with the American Community Survey. So you may have had data sets that were in the 2000, or data topics that were covered in the 2000 that were no longer covered in the 2010 census, but were picked up by the American Community Survey later on. The older data, as we mentioned in the presentation, is used for comparison. So we may want to know, well, what's been happening in that study area over the last 13 years? Is it growing, declining? Is the demographic characteristics changing relative to race or ethnicity? So that's the real use of that older data, is just understanding what the trends are versus what's happening just at a particular point in time.
Okay. Our second question kind of dovetails with that. Why is such little data available from the 2010 census compared to the 2000 census? And I think you kind of addressed that with the ACS answer there, huh?
Yes, there's the census data is going to be really basic population data, and then anything that is relying upon sort of that sample information is going to be provided by the American Community Survey, which, you know, every year they'll be rolling out new products, the latest information. So it really is it's an enhancement to the information that was provided to us with earlier censuses.
Our next question comes from Wendy Lasher. Can you give a definition of what a disproportionate impact is for environmental justice? I have had Federal Highway comment that disproportionate project impacts to even one or two individuals designated as having low income or minority status constitute environmental justice impacts and should be avoided. Is one or two individuals really a disproportionate impact?
You know, Wendy, I don't think that I'm going to be able to answer that in the context of this presentation. It sounds like maybe one of Rusty's presentations that she gives on environmental justice. So let's let Rusty get back in touch with you relative to that, because I don't want to misspeak.
Wendy has another question. I have had projects where the income range is relatively high, but there are numerous households with public assistance. Can you explain why this would be? What does public assistance mean exactly?
Well, you have to keep in mind that the census data is self-reported data, so I guess there's the potential for, and it's also sample-based, so there's the potential that people report something different that may be happening, and also you'd have to check that margin of error to see how reliable the information is. But as far as, I guess with the same could be said for public assistance, because that would be reported. So that's an instance where you really have to dig a little deeper, get out into the community, talk with some of the social service agencies that are providing services to low-income households just to verify. So it's a really good example of when there is a contradiction in the information that's coming out of census to ask those questions and find out, get a better idea of what's actually happening within the community.
Our next question comes from Dean Rogers. Will you provide sociocultural effects training on the environmental screening tool? And I can answer that one because I, in fact, I do the sociocultural effects training in the environmental screening tool. Our focus is a little bit different, where Tammy is an expert in the how you do sociocultural effects. My focus with the environmental screening tool is how do you use the environmental screening tool for putting that data, documenting the data in that process. And we do have a little bit of, you know, the GIS tool in there, but I try not to get too in depth into how you would use it. But I think you covered a lot of that today.
Okay.
So next, Wendy Lasher again. She's got a lot of great questions. Will you be having more advanced training that gets into using or maneuvering the census through the census website? Example projects and real examples of gathering information outside of the census.
Yes, I believe that that is the next step. This was intended to be an introductory sort of overview of the demographic analysis process, and so there is an intention to do a more detailed look into the process.
All right. Next comes from Chris Daly. Can you discuss data collection methods to capture transit-dependent population data who do not live in the study area but may work or just transit through the project area?
Well, I personally haven't had experience in capturing that kind of data. If I were looking at a project, particular community, I would contact the transit agencies or transit agency that was operating within that area to find out what they could tell me. But I don't have anything off the top of my head as far as a specific way to address that.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Next is from Natalia Cox. I hope I'm saying that right. I thought that block information is confidential. Is that why block groups are preferred?
The block information is confidential for income, but you can actually, for instance, you can go to the block where you live, where you have a sense of who your neighbors are, and you know how many people live there, how many households they're made up of, the age group, the age of the householder, but the income information, the more sensitive information, is not reported at the block level. The reason that we go to the block group level is because that really rich American Community Survey data is available at that level, but not at it's available at the block group level, but not at the block. So that's our primary reason for picking block group as the most valuable for a project level demographic analysis. But if the block groups are particularly large, or there's a reason that you need to look a little closer as to the race and ethnicity groups that's also reported at the block level with census, then you may want to take a look at what's going on in the blocks.
Okay. That's our last question so far. I want to wait another minute or two, give folks a chance to think of other questions.
I'll go ahead and do the wrap-up. If anybody has anything, well, then you can let me know, and we'll address it. Oh, you have one more?
One more, yeah, we got one more.
Oh.
Amy Wee asks, will a list of accepted or approved sources be made available? I don't believe I say USA.com, for instance. So she didn't see USA.com in the slides, so she's wondering if that's a reputable or acceptable source.
Source of the census data? I guess that's what she meant.
Source for data in general, I think, is for general analysis.
If you're, I think that we didn't include all of the sources of data, just those primary ones that that we have access to here in the state of Florida. So, you know, if there's some other source of census data that you would like to use, I don't see any reason why that wouldn't be an accepted form. We just provided some ideas of where you could get the data.
Okay. And a question from Denise Bunwith. Congress has threatened to defund the ACS. What happens then?
Well, I have heard about that, and that would be a terrible thing because we do rely on the information for so much of what we do as transportation planners. I guess at that point in time, we'd have to rely more on our local sources for the information that they're collecting about the community. I mean, that basic information that's coming out of the 10-year censuses would still be available, and I'm not certain if they're thinking of just paring back certain questions for the American Community Survey. I don't know the details on that, but let's hope that that doesn't happen.
Yeah. Okay, no more questions at this time.
Okay, so thanks everybody for participating today. If you have questions about the material covered later on, you can always contact me directly. My information is shown on the screen. Contact information for Rusty Ennemoser with the Department's Central Environmental Management Office is also provided. Rusty is your resource for all aspects of sociocultural evaluation process and public involvement. And you can find a range of useful guides and tools on the Department's SCE evaluation process webpage, and that address is shown again on the bottom of the slide. So that concludes our webinar. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Tammy.
Thanks, Chris.